Hey everyone, welcome to our Clausematch product demo webinar. We're excited to have everyone on board. However, before we get started, I just wanted to walk through a couple of housekeeping items. So in terms of the timeline, Ted Murray, our senior SDR, is going to run through the demo for approximately 20 minutes. Followed by that will be a short Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the demo webinar, please put them in the Q&A box and they might be addressed at the end. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Ted.
Cheers, Amanda. Thanks. So, hi, everybody. As Amanda said, my name's Ted Murray and I'm a senior SDR here at Clausematch. Been with the company for just over a year now. And if this is your first time joining us for a demo, we usually do these monthly and we usually have a certain theme. And the theme for this one is how to streamline your policy review cycles. So as a quick agenda for what I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk firstly through how companies typically run review cycles. So talk through some of those key challenges and risks associated with them, and then talk through how Clausematch essentially solves them. But and then we'll also open up for Q&A. But without further ado, let's get into it. So pre-Clausematch, the review cycle of policies is usually done either through the Google Workspace or Microsoft Suite of Solutions. So by that, when it comes to Word documents or Google Docs, that's where they're drafted and reviewed. And then emails, that's where it's then communicated out to the various stakeholders in the organization to get their input. And then usually on spreadsheets is where information is stored, from policy information to how different documents interact with each other. Now, before I go any further, we also use these tools internally. You know, they've got their place, but we know for a fact that when they were being designed, however many years ago, they didn't exactly have risk, compliance, legal people at front of mind, which essentially means that during review cycles, they tend to be slow, manual, and pretty disconnected. So on the right-hand side are some typical pains and challenges that we hear. So collaborating across disconnected systems, from Word documents to emails to spreadsheets, it means that it really slows down the review cycle and information gets lost in between. There's also no clear accountability or ownership of when people are involved in that policy review cycle. And then also trying to locate policies and more importantly, the right version of a policy is pretty difficult, especially when they reside in different silos and folders. But then lastly, when a policy has gone through its review cycle, and trying to understand where that policy has impacted other related documents like standards or procedures, it's quite hard to monitor that and understand the impacts of that. So that also then leads to a set of risks from this. So governance, capacity, and regulatory risks. So from a governance standpoint, when there's no clear process or workflow from drafting to validation and release of policies, there's no real oversight that people get to see, and as a result, things get quite messy quite quickly. And then from a capacity standpoint, there's usually, we find this a lot when speaking with risk and compliance teams, that there's usually one person somewhere that has a lot of information stored in their head, and when that person leaves or retires, they take with them all that information, so they leave big gaps. And ultimately, using disconnected systems, there's always going to be, the ball's going to be dropped at some point, human error. And because of how slow these review cycles are, tends to eat into people's days. And the opportunity cost of that, you want to be spending your time on the high stakes, high value activity and tasks, not buried in spreadsheets and Word documents. And then from a regulatory standpoint, trying to see how policies interact with each other through a spreadsheet is quite difficult. And then when you've been asked to prep evidence, be it an audit trail, and having to look back through meeting minutes, email chains to put together a coherent audit trail, it can be quite time consuming and lead to a lot of sleepless nights. But without further ado, I'm going to jump into the platform now and show you how Clausematch addresses these. So hold on a second. Cool. So what you're seeing in front of you now is the Clausematch login. So this is just, it's the SaaS application, cloud-based. It's, if you've got Okta or Google, it's a single sign-on, so it's pretty easy to log into. And then what I'd just like to bring your attention to first is that this is the home screen. Top right, the grid icon, we're currently in the policy management module. Clausematch is two modules. You've got policy management that we're in now and policy portal. Policy portal, just quickly to let you know, that's where published documents go, and that's where you can measure adherence, engagement, attestation to them. But because of course we're talking about streamlining the policy review cycle, we're going to remain in policy management. And it is somewhat of a misnomer being called policy management because it's all governance related documents. So as I mentioned before, standards, procedures, pre-level policies, local policies, this is what Clausematch is all for. So the first thing that I wanted to address was the governance risk that I talked about. So no standard protocol of what policy review cycles should follow. Now, I want to talk firstly about templates. This is a capability in Clausematch. Doesn't sound particularly cool, but what a template does is it is the backbone of the automation behind policy review cycles. So if I take the group policy template and open it up, this might look like just like a standard document, but it's very, very separate from a normal policy. And what I mean by that is that there's three things that a template allows a policy to do. So when a policy is married to a template, it's going to inherit three things. One, the structure, look and feel. So the company logo, the font size, all the cosmetics, color scheme, etc. But then secondly, it's going to also enforce the workflow behind the policy. So the draft stage, the review stage, pre-release stage, etc. And then thirdly, the metadata. So all of that policy information in the background, like, for example, jurisdiction or document type. In this case, it's a policy. But to show you what that actually looks like, so just look to the structure, look and feel, the aesthetics, and then behind the scenes, this is the workflow. So any policy that is married to this template is going to have these same characteristics, all the way from drafting to validation and release eventually. What this essentially is doing, though, is from how does this streamline your policy review cycles? It essentially replaces the need for having to email different stakeholders and say, hey, by the way, ball's in your court now. By having these set stages, once it's gone past the 30 days, it's going to go into review stage. And as denoted by these little tick boxes that I just want to bring your attention to, this is where people in the draft and the review stage, they're able to edit. As you can see, as we get to the approval stages, there's a lock icon. That means that they're not able to edit and they're purely there for giving their stamp of approval, whoever those stakeholders are. And then the validation stage, again, there's an exclamation mark. That's representative of the mandatory stage tick box here. So no policy can go beyond this point, and these people have to validate it. So yeah, like I say, no need to chase stakeholders. As soon as it goes from draft to review, those people are going to get notified by an email. That's going to have a URL. They just go straight into it and pick up where you left off. From a metadata standpoint, on the right-hand side here, all this kind of information is usually held on a spreadsheet somewhere and maintained by a group of people. But what this basically does is ensures that policies, any kind of documents, they're going to be searchable and reportable. So any policy that's married to this template, they're going to have to populate this information on the back end. And then, like I say, it essentially replaces the need for manually updating spreadsheets with this policy information. And you're going to hear me say metadata a few times here, but to show you what I mean by metadata making things searchable and reportable, I'm going to go back to the home page here. And then on the right-hand side, which is the typical search capability that you're used to, and then some. So let's use, for example, the filters, AML. So there is that Boolean capability as well. Go down to filters. Those two of the metadata fields that I used before were jurisdiction. So we can add in a jurisdiction filter. And document type was another. So now if I pick values like UK for the jurisdiction, and then the document being, well, I'm going to have to choose a policy, aren't I? Because we love policies here. And as a result, that's really narrowed down the search to only two documents. Now, this is useful because, like I say, trying to find stuff amongst different silos of information and repositories is hard. With Clausematch, it's all centralized, so there's no need to sift through loads of antiquated places and storage. And then if I take you to the other side, categories and documents. So typically, risk and compliance teams will have their own themes and hierarchies across all their governance documents. One thing that can be said is, let's use the example of anti-money laundering policy again. It usually isn't mutually exclusive. So what I mean by that is that it will reside in multiple folders. So say, for example, in risk taxonomy, and again, just to bring out again, the professional services team at Clausematch can help with designing best practice for this and set it up in your own way, depending on, of course, your use case. But I know that there's one anti-money laundering policy here, but I know that same anti-money laundering policy resides in reputational risk and in regulatory risk here. So already there's 3 places this policy resides. And from a versioning perspective, this can be a nightmare for risk and compliance teams because once you update one, you then need to, of course, make sure that the most up-to-date version is put back in the same folder and also the other folders. So, but with Clausematch, when, say, for example, this anti-money laundering policy is updated, all of those changes get automatically reflected across all the other folders. That way, you don't need to worry about, there's no duplication of efforts. And also it means that members of the team don't accidentally access older versions of the policies and end up working on them. So it completely eliminates versioning control issues. But from a drafting and updating standpoint, what does the day-to-day of that look like? So we're going to stick with anti-money laundering. This is what an anti-money laundering policy would look like in Clausematch. As you can see, it looks pretty similar to what you're probably already used to for drafting and updating your policies. As you can see, we're in the drafting stage. And I know that we touched on templates before, but I just want to show you what that looks like in practice as well. So if I scroll down here to look at the related document, as you can see, the AML policy has been married to this policy template. That means that it's inherited all the characteristics from what I mentioned before, the workflow, the metadata behind it and all those fields, but also the permissions. So, for example, here is your list of the defined roles and responsibilities of each member of the team throughout the review cycle, whether it's an owner, an editor, a reviewer, or read release. But actually collaborating real time, what does that look like? So if I take us to the first paragraph, as I say, I'm a drafter in this case, so I do have editing rights. Let's just making a change here. What then happens in the information sidebar here, if I go down to document activity, that change is reflected immediately. And I can take that one step further. This is the paragraph activity level. So automatically, it creates an audit trail of all the activity related to just this one paragraph. So you can get really, really, really granular with it. And what's more, if I click into it, you get to see the green and the red line of what's happened, who made the change, and when. Now, what's more, another nice piece of capability about this is that you can then export it at a click of a button. So all of the changes that have been made on this document, I just press that, it's going to download that audit trail. Now, that really does help to streamline the policy review cycle, because it means that you're no longer having to go through track changes, those meeting minutes that I mentioned before, and various other silos to gain that information to put together an audit trail. It's there, it's done in real time. So think how many sleepless nights that'll stop. And then one thing that I did touch on from a regulatory risk standpoint was the mappings. So typically we hear that risk and compliance teams use spreadsheets where they will have, say, procedures, standards, and policies, and they will map the relationship between them statically. With Clausematch, you're able to create dynamic relationships between documents and documents, documents and paragraphs, paragraphs and paragraphs. And what this essentially means is that when a change is made in a certain paragraph, that will then notify all the other owners of the other documents and paragraphs related to that a change has been made. And then they can then go in when they get an alert on email and then assess that change, how that impacts their document or paragraph, and make a subsequent change. So to show you what that looks like in practice, if I go to connections here are all the connections that are related to this anti-money laundering policy. So going to the AML customer lifecycle standard, if I go to enhanced due diligence, that immediately highlights those two paragraphs that are linked together. Why is this good? This is good because it means that you don't have to wait for an annual review cycle to then start looking at changes. You can, when you get that notification, you can dive straight in and action it there and then. So you're not having a big backlog on that yearly review. And again, this is just at one level of relationship. You can then take this out. If I go to the compliance dashboard here, and I've set this up in a similar way to what I mentioned with procedures, standards, and policies, you're able to see all the relationships that the anti-money laundering policy has with standards and the procedures. And in this case, it's just the one. So when a change happens here, that's then going to have an upstream impact on the rest of them. So the owner of the standard is going to be notified. The owner of the AML policy is going to be notified as well. So from a bird's eye view, it's pretty straightforward to see. And like I say, it's dynamic. And then the last thing that I want to show you is the reporting capability. So typically during annual review cycles, you'll have to go to different stakeholders or rather policy owners and see what's the status update on this policy, where are we up to, what stage is it at, are we overdue, or is it approaching due, whatever. And then coupling together that information to report on it to the board or your CCO takes longer than necessary. With Clausematch, because of the metadata that I mentioned with document type, etc., you're able to easily create automated reports and charts to see for example, what's approaching due, what's overdue. So let's take overdue, for example, overdue of the past 14 days, and it's organized by document type. And well, I'm a visual learner, so I'm going to go to a chart view. We can see that there's 5 policies that are overdue by at most 14 days. And what you can do is you can interact with those 5, see who the owners are, and then give them an encouraging nudge. Similarly as well for the procedure. But this makes reporting easy, and yeah, no longer having to chase stakeholders for this information. So I appreciate I've done a pretty fast whistle-stop tour of how Clausematch helps to streamline the policy review cycle. But yeah, just wanted to illustrate why the likes of Currency Cloud, Barclays, and Zedra are all using the platform. But if there's any questions in the chat, I'll be happy to take them.
Yeah, thank you, Ted, so much. I want to start with a question that we get from a lot of prospective clients. Can you share what type of documents you can upload in Clausematch? Is it only like Word documents, or can you upload any other types?
Cool. Yeah. So from when it comes to uploading documents, you upload via docx. It's a pretty simple conversion. And say, for example, if you're wanting to put 100 policies into the platform, the professional services team here do a lot of that heavy lifting and converting. So it's not necessarily a big time burden for yourselves. But what you can also do as well, which is probably preferable, is you can also start from scratch within the platform.
Great. Another question that came in is, does Clausematch provide regulations?
No. So one thing to make absolutely clear is that the Clausematch is a workflow tool. It's not a horizon scanner, so we don't provide those regulations. What we can do is upload those regulations though, and create that downstream regulatory origin from procedures, policies back to that regulation, or however you would like to create those dynamic mappings as I just showed before. But yeah, the regulations do not come in the platform.
Yeah, perfect. All right, looks like we have one last question. Can you share how pricing works within Clausematch?
Yeah, sure. So I'll keep it high level, but basically it's subscription basis like most SaaS organizations, but then there's also tiers in users. So you have power users, so they have full admin rights across the review cycle, and then there's also light users, which obviously are more inexpensive, but obviously lesser rights where you're only able to review.
Cool, perfect. All right, that looks like that wraps up the questions. If you have any other questions about the platform, please feel free to reach out to us at info@clausematch.com. And you can also go to clausematch.com and fill out our contact or book a demo request as well. So with that, I want to thank you, Ted, for walking through today's demo. It was really thorough, and I know we all really appreciated it. For everyone who's still on, we're going to send out a follow-up email with a link to the demo recording, as well as I wanted to let you guys know we are also hosting a webinar next week on the true cost of compliance. So I'll provide a link so that you can register for that as well. So thanks again, Ted, and thank you everyone for showing up today. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Cheers, guys. Take care.
Bye.